Say hey everybody and welcome to SorareFP. I'm Alex Hooper. Today I want to take you through a tutorial on roster building for SORAREMLB. Now this is coming from having played the game for the full half year at least, that it's been out from the All-Star break and on. So I want to bestow upon you some of the things we've learned in the community over that time. So if you're new to Sorare or just starting in SorareMLB, you can know how to build a very sharp MLB gallery that sets you up for the opening part of the season. Before we get any further, I want to plug the Patreon, patreon.com/SorareFP. I do believe we're the only baseball projections provider for Sorare at this time, at least at the time of recording. I don't know of any others. So if you want to come join us, if you want projections, it's $5 a month. If you want the projections and some extra tips and access to the Discord, head into the description, patreon.com/SorareFP to get started. I recommend the $10 version. There is a $50 version where you can consult straight with me, but I recommend the $10 version and access to the Discord because there's so much knowledge that goes on there and so much extra news that comes through there as well. All right, getting started in SorareMLB. If you are already an MLB fan, if you're a big-time MLB fan, you probably know this. It's going to be the number one thing to start your gallery with. It's the same thing that general managers and executives in baseball start their team with. It's value. Value, value, value. If you come into SorareMLB and you're ready to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can do that. You can go out and buy the best players, and you'll likely have the most success over the course of a year. But in baseball, things are very random, especially in 3 to 4 game stretches, which is how long the game weeks last. That said, there's plenty of variance, and there are plenty of ways to get onto the podium and win some of the best prizes in the game. When you go to start your team and start your gallery and start buying cards, the biggest thing you want to do is set a budget. Just like any MLB team, they have a budget in mind for what they want to pay for players. You can do that here as well. Now, it's important to know how to find value. Obviously, you can use our projections, but there are certain aspects of SorareMLB where you can find that value within the game. There's nothing wrong with buying your favorite player. If you're a Dodgers fan and you want Mookie Betts instead of a guy like Brian Reynolds, go crazy. The difference between the two probably isn't as big as you think. While Mookie Betts is great, he does a lot of great things. In the course of a 3-game game week, he could have a fantastic week, while Brian Reynolds could still have a better week. And it's going to happen time and time again. Again, over the course of the season, Betts will probably get you more points. But knowing guys like Brian Reynolds and how to find them who might give you a little more value and a little less notoriety is very important. Again, we're updating those projections and season-long projections with price values and tools to help you identify who those players are. We have them all over at SorareFP. If you don't want to go that route, there are still ways to identify these players. Season-long projections like those you find on Fangraphs are actually pretty accurate. So if you want to go over to Fangraphs.com and start sorting through those, you can find a couple of players who, when you plug them into SorareData.com, their prices aren't as high as some others around them. Those are the guys you want to target. But again, just like in Major League Baseball, if you have a budget, there are certain players you can afford and certain players you can't afford. You can still find hidden production out of those players that are more in your price range. Keep in mind, because of the scoring matrix, not all the players you expect to be great are actually great in the game. For one, Shohei Ohtani, while fantastic as a pitcher and as a hitter, has some nuance to his card that you can learn about that make him not the greatest play week in and week out. Sometimes he pitches and sometimes he hits, and you can only get points for one side of that arrangement per week. So realistically, his value isn't as high if he's not playing as many games. Without as many opportunities to hit, he may not seize that opportunity as often and exceed those who have a bigger opportunity. Otherwise, when you think about middle infielders, guys like Wander Franco and Bo Bichette, there's a big difference in how they project and how they impact the game. There are also players who are much better defenders, and that's where they find their value in Major League Baseball, but without defense points in SoRare, they're not quite as advantageous. One of the key things to look at when assessing value is value over replacement player, and that's another thing that we have at SorareFP. We have those calculations that tell you who at what position are worth going after and are worth spending more on relative to others at other positions. You can find that video on the YouTube channel. Try and link to it in the bio, but that'll help you identify some value there. For example, if you look at the pool of outfielders, you'll notice that there are a long list of guys who project very similarly and can score you the same amount of points. There's a really large cluster of players in the middle who do pretty much the same thing. Some of them are going to have higher prices. Some of them are going to have lower prices based on other things like who they're playing that week or what team they're on or just general hype around the player. If they're in the news cycle, their price will go up. You want to identify the lower price players who can score in that same amount or who are projected to score in that same range, and those are the guys you want to go after. The other thing to consider is you find more of that middle value and less players who separate themselves in positions like middle infield. So if you have a middle infielder who will score you around 1,200 points over the course of a season and an outfielder who will score you around 1,200 points a season, the middle infielder is going to be more valuable because there are less people who do that at that position. It's going to be easier to find that type of output in the outfield for a lesser price, whereas in the middle infield, with so few options to choose from, it's going to be a little more difficult. So keep this in mind when you're putting together your initial team and make sure you're marking the most valuable players that you can afford. Budget out each position, how much depth you need at each position, which we'll talk about in a second, and sort of the kind of lineups you want to be able to construct. If you're starting solely in the limited division, you're going to want enough to play the two contests that are available. That's going to be Limited All-Star and All-Star Pro. In All-Star Pro, you can win your way up to the rare division, and maybe you want to prioritize your better players there. Maybe you want to prioritize your better players in Limited All-Star. Overall, I'd recommend buying a team that allows you to play in both contests and optimize one of the lineups. So what are some of the things you look for when you're building your team, and what adds value? This one's going to be a little simple, but home runs are king in SoRare and fantasy baseball. Obviously, when you hit a home run, you get a home run, a run, and at least one RBI. One home run in SORAREMLB is about 15 points. That's going to be about 4 doubles. So a player who goes 1 for 4 with a home run and 4 for 4, 4 doubles are going to score about the same amount of points. So obviously, you want the home runs there. Singles hitters take a lot more time to accumulate points, and while they can make the difference in your lineup, you do want to prioritize home runs. It seems simple, but sometimes you're looking between, a player who might hit 17 homers in a year and some who might hit 10 home runs in a year. And if they're the same price, you want to prioritize the other guy who hits home runs as opposed to the guy who just hits for average. Now, additionally, and we didn't see a lot of this last year, but stolen bases are worth 5 points and are another thing that you really want to prioritize when building a lineup. Before these new rules in Major League Baseball where you can only disengage from the rubber as a pitcher twice during an at-bat, we weren't seeing as many stolen bases as we're used to, but we do expect to see a lot more in the upcoming season. So generally, you were just looking for guys who, if they did steal bases, you felt a lot better about it. But now you can probably prioritize some of the guys who run and run often and try and put them into your lineup. Again, stolen bases are worth 5, and that's worth a double, and it's very much in the hands of the player themselves. They don't have to just work a double. If they get on base, whether it's a walk or a single, it's up to them to choose whether or not they can steal a base or try and steal a base. If there are players who take that opportunity often, you want to prioritize them because they are giving you so many more opportunities to score points. If they get thrown out, you lose your shot at a run, but that doesn't really matter. You just want the guys who are going to try and steal bases a lot. Moving on to a little bit of a cheat code or a hack in SORAREMLB, what we found was relief pitchers who start games can really help you in the course of a game week. The main person and maybe the hottest player in all of SORAREMLB last season was Spencer Strider, who was listed as a relief pitcher. He could fill your relief pitcher spot, but he was starting full games, throwing 7 innings, and accumulating more points in a single start than a really elite reliever could accumulate over the course of, a 3 or 4 game week. Keep in mind, a relief pitcher has to have the opportunity to pitch, and sometimes they only pitch once or twice in a game week, maybe not at all. So there's no safety net there. The upside is a little higher if you get a reliever who comes into 3 save situations or 3 hold situations in a week and converts all of them, strike out a couple of batters, they don't give up any runs, then you're going to have some upside there that really no one but Spencer Strider can reach as a starting pitcher in your relief spot. But what a relief pitcher in your starting pitcher spot does is it guarantees you at least some points. And that can be the difference at the top of the leaderboard. Sometimes, you finish 8 points out of that starting spot, and a really bad start from a relief pitcher who can factor into that position, they can put you over the top. So I recommend finding at least one of those relievers who do start games. Austin Vogt is another one other than Strider, Taylor Hearns. There's going to be more as spring training goes along. So follow the news, and if you can identify some of those guys who are listed as relievers before the rest of the market, you can get in there and not only make yourself some money by buying those pitchers and then reselling them, maybe a little closer to their start, but you also have the opportunity to play them, which is going to help you quite a bit. Let's talk about depth for a second. To fill out a lineup, you're going to need a starting pitcher, a relief pitcher, a corner infielder, a middle infielder, an outfielder, an extra hitter, and one other player at any other position. So when you're building a team, that means you want at least 14 players if you want to play in both lineups. Even if you're only building one team and want to continually play it over and over the course of the season, keep in mind that starting pitchers don't always get an opportunity from game week to game week. If a pitcher pitches at the late end of a game week, they probably won't pitch in the next game week. This is why you want to keep a steady pen of starting pitchers ready, maybe 3 or 4. I recommend 4. Not only does having an extra starting pitcher help you make sure that someone is pitching each game week, but if you have multiple pitchers pitching in a game week, especially on the weekend, it can give you an advantage. Remember how I was talking about a starting pitcher in the relief spot? A starting pitcher in your extra spot at the end can guarantee you some extra points as well. Keep in mind that even the best hitters can post zeros or single-digit scores over the course of 3 games. This is very, very common in baseball. With an extra starting pitcher in your lineup, you can still get some of those guaranteed points that we talked about with the relief pitcher. The difference is if you pitch 2 good starting pitchers, they can easily put up 40-point games, and all of a sudden, you're looking at a nice lineup. The only difference between playing a starter in your flex spot and hitter in your flex spot is generally the hitter gives you the upside to win. A pitcher isn't always going to give you the same amount of upside, but they're going to give you a lot of floor points. So in a weekend game week, when teams are generally only playing up to 3 games, having that floor is a little easier because there's less variance and less opportunity for a hitter to have a crazy week that outscores every single starting pitcher. Personally, I prefer to use the starting pitcher in my extra spot instead of a hitter, unless I have a hitter who I really like and projects better than the starting pitcher. As far as hitters go, you want to think about stacking. Now, if you're coming to us from Daily Fantasy Sports or if you've played DFS baseball in the past, you'll know that stacking is a key element to DFS baseball. While there's opportunities to stack full lineups in SoRare, oftentimes what we're finding is that full stacks aren't the best way to go. Don't get me wrong, they've had plenty of success, and there have been plenty of players who have won game weeks by stacking some of the elite teams, namely the Mets and the Dodgers. Because game weeks are over the course of entire series or maybe 4 game spans instead of 1 game span like in DFS, you can really maximize your lineup by doing mini stacks. I'm talking about 2 players, maybe 3 players from the same lineup who hit within 1 or 2 spots of each other. So you get some correlation. You get one hitter who hits a double and gets on base, and then another player hits a double and gets on base, drives that runner home. You get all the runs, you get the RBIs, you get the doubles, and it all gives you extra points because you had both of them. When you do that with multiple players, I'm talking 3 to 4, maybe even 5 players from the same lineup, they have to have an absolutely crazy 3-game stretch if they're going to give you the type of output that, maybe 2 pairs of really good teammates put up over the course of a weekend. So say you stack Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., as well as Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. It's possible that Bichette and Vlad each hit 3-4 home runs in the course of a 3-game series, and the same can be done for Ohtani and Trout, something like that. In the case of if you play Bichette and Guerrero and Alejandro Kirk and Lourdes Gurriel all together, the odds of all 4 of them just having bananas weekends against any team, it's a lot less. So if you can pair 2 or 3 really good studs together with a pair of studs from another team, that raises your ceiling just a little bit, at least theoretically. So when you're building your lineup and you find a player that you really like, think about finding a teammate that generally hits in the same area of the lineup. Let's talk about positions really quickly. At middle infield, you're going to get catchers lumped in there. You have to keep in mind that catchers generally only play 2 out of every 3 games. So in the same way that relief pitchers don't always get the same opportunities as others to score points, the opportunity for a middle infielder to play all 3 or 4 games is that much easier when it's a second baseman or shortstop as opposed to a catcher who is going to have a lot more scheduled off days. Opportunity is huge in SoRare because scoring is cumulative, so you want players who play as many games as possible. This gives them as many opportunities to score points as possible, and catchers just don't get that. There are a few catchers who are worth putting in the spot, JT Realmuto being one of them and one of the very few. Also look for catchers who DH on their day off. Alejandro Kirk is one of those guys, but even he's going to get a couple of days off here and there. He'll maybe play 138 games as opposed to 151, and that's really a negligible difference, but it does take away that much utility over the course of the season. I want to call back to something from earlier in the video really quickly, and that's positional variance. I talked about value over replacement player, or VORP. Keep in mind that players who can play multiple positions can fill in lesser holes in your lineup from a week-to-week basis. For example, a player like MJ Melendez from the Royals, who is a catcher, but also DHs and plays the outfield. He covers all 3 mandatory spots in a lineup. So say if you have Melendez and you're very weak at middle infield that week, you can play him there. If you're very weak at corner infield, because of the DH spot, you can play him there. Or if you're very weak in the outfield, you can play him there as well. There are guys like this, like John Birdie for one, but most players will have multiple positions at just 2. So middle infield, corner infield, or middle infield, outfield, something like that. So when you're building your lineup, if it comes down to one player versus another, just know that you get that much more utility out of a player who can switch around in lineups and gives you a better chance to optimize that lineup going forward. The last thing I want to discuss is players who play at hitter-friendly parks. Keep in mind that players from teams like the Colorado Rockies or Cincinnati Reds are going to benefit a ton from playing at their home. In 2022, players from those teams were generally pretty bad. So when they left those confines, if they were playing on the road, you generally didn't get that much output from them. So keep in mind if you're going to roster some Rockies players or some Reds players, you're going to be a little weaker in some game weeks when they're away from home versus when they're playing at home. So just understand some of the variance and some of the volatility of buying those players. So just in summation, I want to say I would recommend buying 4 starting pitchers, 2 relief pitchers, and at least 2 players at corner infield, middle infield, and outfield. If you have the budget, buy 2 more players so you can play in 2 lineups and optimize the chances of winning more cards more often. In the coming weeks, we'll talk about lineup building, when it's a little closer to having to build those lineups at least, and I'll give you tips about how to build those lineups and what to prioritize when putting them together. If you have any more questions or any other things that you want me to talk about in one of these videos, drop it in the comments below. Also, make sure to like and subscribe if you want more SoRare MLB content. If you want to join us at SorareFP, we would love to have you. The link is in the bio. And just so you know, when you join, you get MLB and NBA projections and advice all for the same price. I'm Alex Hooper. I'm very grateful that you tuned into this video, and I look forward to talking to you soon.